America's sin debt for slavery was paid for long ago. Fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray, that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. Yet if God wills that it continue until all the wealth piled by the bondsmen's 250 years of unequated toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid by another drawn with the sword. As was said 3,000 years ago, so still it must be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and the righteous altogether. Abraham Lincoln's second inaugural speech, March 4th, 1865. Now that was delivered a scanty 41 days before Lincoln gave, as he himself put it in his address at Gettysburg, the last full measure of devotion. Our 16th president's language sings, it soars. It is high poetry. Somebody called Lincoln that sad poet of a president. Words which capture pretty completely what in essence this great man was. The only other American public figure who has even arguably come close to wielding the English language so profoundly and effectively is Martin Luther King. And it is no coincidence that both men were animated by the same cause in different iterations. It was in his second inaugural speech that Lincoln spoke not just as skilled political actor or a poet, but in a sense as a prophet. He seemed to have had a unique insight into the heart of the tragedy that was the American Civil War. I've been thinking about his wealth piled by the bondsmen's 250 years of unequated toil observation, and wondering how close to the truth Lincoln had struck. It turns out, in fact, that he had struck very close to the truth. The common accepted death toll for the American Civil War was 618,000. That figure was recently revised upward to 750,000. At any rate, I decided to compare that number with the total number of Africans imported as slaves to the continental U.S. throughout her colonial and national history. I was wondering, frankly, whether the life of at least one American taken during the Civil War, of which is its approximate cause was the existence and spread of slavery, was balanced out for every African brought here. American historian Henry Louis Gates says the following: between 1525 and 1866, in the entire history of the slave trade to the New World, according to the Transatlantic Slave Trade Database, 12.5 million Africans were shipped to the New World. 10.7 million survived the dreaded Middle Passage, disembarking in North America, the Caribbean, and South America. And how many of these 10.7 million Africans were shipped directly to North America? Only about 388,000. That's right, a tiny percentage. So given the death rate of 14.4% of those who did not survive the Middle Passage, that raises the number of slaves destined for American ports to 443,000. Now I have a rather grim question for you. Is the death of 750,000 Americans and the remaining of thousands more as a direct consequence to the presence of the slavery in this country an approximately fair price to pay for the forced importation of 443 Africans to America? For 250 years of unequated toil, plus another 90 or so years of Jim Crow laws. Well, this is an issue only God can fairly educate, but it puts things into an entirely new and interesting perspective for me, at least, if not anybody else. You may be surprised, given the recent events, that the condition of Black Americans has actually been improving over the last decades. Here's Kyle Smith writing recently in the New York Post. The Economic Policy Institute found that the difference in high school graduation rates between whites and blacks fell from 27% in 1962 to just 5% in 2004. Last fall, the rate of black and Hispanic unemployment hit an all-time low since 1980. The percentage of black adults with college degrees has tripled. Life expectancy of white Americans exceeded that of black Americans by more than 7 years as of 1970. That gap has been cut in half to 3.5 years. The percentage of black Americans earning more than $75,000 has more than doubled, adjusting for inflation, between 1970 and 2014, according to Harvard professor William Julius Wilson, who studied upward mobility among black Americans. So what's the problem, one might ask? With all this wonderful progress, why are all the recent brouhaha going on? The answer can be distilled to a couple of major factors. 1. The creation of a permanent black underclass thanks to the unintended consequences of civil rights legislation passed in the 1960s, which has given economic incentives for fatherless households in black community. And 2. The steadily advancing agenda of cultural Marxism, which has led to the tsunami of political correctness, PC, and the instant shaming and expulsion of liberals and conservatives of the principle from positions of power and influence. Throw in this conclusive collective deliverance from 3 months of, as turned out, mostly unnecessary lockdown, and you have a perfect blueprint for bad behavior right out of the communist playbook. Not all of this is bad, of course. Police tactics can always stand scrutiny, since they are the only ones in civilization entrusted with the threat of and the use of force to apply local laws effectively. Individuals who have irrational distaste for people having a different paint job than they do need to do some serious self-reflection. Is life more difficult for a black man? Well, yes, it is. Much of this cultural, however, not racial. It follows from the fact that 40% of violent crimes are committed by 6% of the population, i.e., black males. If that's institutional racism in the view of a lot of rather shallow thinkers, then march until your shoes wear out. It won't change until crime stats change, and crime stats won't change until a revolution takes place in the black underclass. The first ramblings of that revolution are happening even as we speak. There is very slow a tectonic shift taking place in the African American community as black Americans, by ones and twos, by dozens and hundreds, by the droves, are slowly waking up to the fact that they've been had by the Democrats. They have always been had by the Democrats, who are the fiercest opponents to emancipation, to the staunchest supporters of Jim Crow, and they steely are the backbone of the KKK, who they invented to kill off black Republican congressmen back in the 1800s. Democrats are scared stiff that they'll lose their African American constituents, and they should be, if they don't take their party back from the extreme left and get their act together. Their historic measurement of their most loyal demographic, they'll be shunned and shunned off to the sidelines as a semi-permanent minority party, and that's bad for the republic. A one-party system always is, but I'm sure something else will come up. Didn't they just say Black Lives Matter is now a, party? Again, I am Michael. This is the Patriot Hour. God bless, Godspeed to each and every one of you. And where we go one, we go all. Thank you for sharing this video across all social media platforms while you can. Please subscribe if you are new, if you're a returning Patriot. Thank you for being here. We love the Patriots. God bless each and every one of you. And we'll see you back here on the next update video.